Welcome to the Veil of Truth, your gateway to uncovering hidden insights and illuminating mysteries. I'm thrilled you've joined our global community. Whether you're watching from a bustling city skyline or a quiet countryside, we're glad you're here. Globe showing Europe, Africa, so tell me, where are you tuning in from today? Chapter 1, The Invitation. The little market town of Winstable was the sort of place where time seemed reluctant to move forward. Its cobbled high street curved like an old spine, lined with Georgian facades and crooked shop signs that creaked in the autumn breeze. Gas lamps, fitted with electric bulbs but still retaining their quaint design, flickered into life as dusk fell. Poirot and Hastings walked side by side, their steps measured, their figures outlined in the mellow glow. They had come not for business, but for leisure, a brief escape from the clamour of London. Hastings, ever fond of the countryside, had insisted upon it, picturing long walks, hearty suppers, and the possibility of a little fishing. Poirot, though he confessed little interest in rustic pursuits, had agreed. To stroll after a good dinner, mon ami, is the supreme wisdom, Poirot remarked, tapping his cane lightly upon the stones. It aids the digestion, it calms the mind, and, who knows, it may even present to Hercule Poirot an intrigue or two. Hastings chuckled. I rather think Winstable is too quiet for intrigues. No murders or master criminals here, only grocers, haberdashers, and tea shops. Poirot's moustache twitched in amusement. And yet, Hastings, it is often in the quietest corners that one finds the most curious disturbances. Crime, it does not always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it lurks behind lace curtains, beneath the respectable exterior. They had reached a curious little establishment on the corner of the square. Above its window, painted in gold letters, was the sign, Pratt's Curiosities and Fine Goods. The window itself gleamed with an assortment of objects, delicate porcelain teapots, tiny bronze figurines, a stuffed owl with glass eyes, and a silver clock whose hands had stopped at precisely 5 minutes past 2. Hastings paused. Good Lord, what a jumble! It looks half like a junk shop and half like a museum. As he spoke, the door opened with a cheerful jingle, and out stepped the proprietor himself. Mr. Leonard Pratt was a stout gentleman in his 50s, his face ruddy, his hair already sparse. His manner was eager, almost anxious, as if he feared losing custom by the mere passage of time. Gentlemen! Good evening, good evening. Fine night, is it not? He recognized Poirot instantly, as so many did. Why, bless me, it's Mr. Hercule Poirot, the detective. What an honor, sir, what an honor indeed. Poirot inclined his head graciously. You are too kind, monsieur. And you are the proprietor of this establishment, perhaps? That I am, sir. Leonard Pratt, dealer in curiosities, antiques, and a few little luxuries. May I entice you in? We've just had a consignment from the continent, most unusual pieces. And I assure you, prices most reasonable. Hastings, whose pocketbook rarely extended to antique purchases, looked doubtful. But Poirot's curiosity had already been stirred. With a little bow, he accepted. Inside, the shop was a cavern of wonders. Shelves climbed high upon the walls, laden with china, brass candlesticks, and embroidered boxes. Cabinets of polished mahogany displayed ivory carvings, silver snuff-boxes, and old coins. The air smelt faintly of beeswax and something else, perhaps sandalwood. Poirot moved slowly, eyes gliding from object to object, his hands clasped behind his back. He had no real interest in acquiring antiques, but he observed everything with his usual precision, the arrangement of items, the fine dust on the highest shelves, the nervous flicker of Pratt's eyes as he hovered behind them. You keep a varied stock, monsieur, Poirot remarked. Surely it is not easy to guard against theft, when each object is of such small size and so delicate. Pratt gave a quick, uneasy laugh. Ah, there you touch upon it, sir. Indeed, I have had difficulties of late. That is, disturbances. Hastings looked up, instantly intrigued. Disturbances? Do you mean burglaries? The shopkeeper lowered his voice, glancing at the door to ensure no customer entered. I hardly like to speak of it, bad for business, you see, but yes, strange happenings. Articles moved from one place to another, though I alone had the key. Noises after closing, scratching, creaking, as if someone prowled unseen. And twice, yes, twice, there were attempts upon the display cases. Locks tampered with, glass cracked. Were the police informed? Asked Poirot gently. Well, I did call Sergeant Martin. A worthy fellow, but no progress. He insists it must be children, playing pranks. Yet I know my shop, Mr. Poirot. I know when something is amiss. And what is more, his face, ruddy before, now looked drawn. I believe it will happen again. There was a pause. Poirot's eyes, dark and alert, fixed upon the man's. And tonight, monsieur? Pratt swallowed. Tonight, I intend to remain here after hours. To keep a vigil, as you might say. It is perhaps a foolish plan, but I will not have my livelihood ruined by prowlers and mischief-makers. Yet, I confess, I do not relish the prospect of sitting alone in the dark, with every creak of the floorboard setting my nerves on edge. Poirot's moustache quivered. He looked at Hastings, who was plainly torn between reluctance and excitement. Poirot then turned back to the shopkeeper. Monsieur Pratt, you flatter Hercule Poirot by seeking his aid. I must confess, such matters intrigue me. To sit in the dark and observe, yes, it may not be the most comfortable of adventures, but one may learn much when one listens to the silence. Hercule Poirot accepts. Hastings stared. Really, Poirot? A midnight vigil in an antique shop. Poirot spread his hands. But of course, mon ami. Why should we deny ourselves a little diversion? You see, Hastings, already your quiet town of Winstable provides the intrigue you thought impossible. Ah, how well I know human nature! Always, beneath the tranquil surface, the ripple of disorder waits. Pratt clasped his hands in relief. Bless you, sir, bless you! I cannot say what comfort it is to have the famous Monsieur Poirot under my roof. You will see for yourself, and perhaps you may catch these rogues red-handed. Poirot shook his head gently. Perhaps. But let us not think only of rogues. There may be other explanations, n'est-ce pas? We shall watch, we shall wait, and we shall see what the night reveals. The bell above the door jingled as another customer entered, and the moment ended. Yet Hastings noticed, as they stepped outside once more into the lamplit street, that Poirot's expression had grown thoughtful. You believe Pratt's story, Poirot? He asked. Poirot smiled faintly. I believe only what the little grey cells confirm, Hastings. But tonight, we shall put them to the test. And I, Hercule Poirot, I have the sense, yes, the strong sense, that Monsieur Pratt's curiosity shop will not be so tranquil as it appears. Thus began their strange midnight adventure. Chapter 2, The Watch Begins. The shop closed promptly at 8:30. Mr. Pratt busied himself with pulling down the blinds and turning the sign to closed. He checked the front door lock twice, then a third time for good measure, his heavy face damp with anxiety. Poirot observed this with polite detachment, as if the man's nervous fussing were a performance staged for their benefit. Hastings muttered to Poirot as they stood by the counter, "Seems rather overdone, don't you think? The fellow acts as if a regiment of burglars were about to march in." Poirot replied softly, "Nervousness, Hastings, is sometimes the mask of guilt. At other times, it is merely the agitation of an honest man who fears he is out of his depth. Let us keep our minds open. Once the last shutter was drawn, the atmosphere of the shop changed. What by daylight had been merely a cluttered but harmless emporium now seemed a labyrinth of shadows. The curios themselves, so quaint in the sunshine, appeared to loom with strange menace. The glass eyes of the stuffed owl glistened from its perch. A set of ivory chessmen, left mid-game in a case, looked like frozen conspirators. Even Hastings, who prided himself on being practical, felt a curious chill. They settled themselves for the vigil. Pratt placed 3 chairs near the small fire grate in the back room, which looked out through a half-door into the main shop. The fire crackled fitfully, throwing long tongues of orange light across the shelves. Pratt brought out a pot of tea and a tin of biscuits, though his own appetite was poor. Hastings tucked in heartily, but Poirot declined. He sat straight-backed, hands folded, eyes travelling ceaselessly over every corner of the room. "Do you not even want a cup of tea?" Poirot asked Hastings. "My friend," said Poirot gravely, "at such times one must keep the senses alert, not dulled with food or drink. The stomach full is the enemy of the mind awake. Regard instead, Hastings, the very silence of this place, it speaks." Hastings, who thought silence spoke only of boredom, shook his head but said no more. For an hour they waited, listening to the occasional tick of the silver clock on the mantelpiece. Every now and again, a cart rattled by in the street outside, or a drunkard sang a line of song before being swallowed by the night. Within the shop, however, the stillness deepened. Pratt shifted uneasily, his chair creaking at every move. Just before midnight, a faint sound interrupted the silence, a long, deliberate scratching. It came, so it seemed, from the rear storeroom beyond the half-door. All 3 men stiffened. Hastings gripped the poker he had drawn from the hearth, while Pratt went visibly pale. Poirot alone remained calm. He held up a finger. "Hush. Do not move suddenly. The night has many sounds. Let us see if it repeats." The scratching continued for perhaps a minute, then ceased. A thud followed, low but distinct, as though something heavy had shifted. Hastings half rose from his chair, but Poirot caught his sleeve. "Patience, mon ami. The bird who is frightened from the branch will not be caught. To rush now is to alarm." Pratt whispered hoarsely, "But it must be them, the burglars." Poirot cocked his head. "Perhaps. Or perhaps it is no more than the timbers of your shop settling in the cool of night. We shall see." At length, Poirot rose. With exaggerated care, he lifted the latch of the half-door and crossed into the main shop. His small, neat figure moved with surprising silence across the uneven boards. Hastings followed a pace behind, poker still clutched in hand, while Pratt lingered near the fire as though rooted by fear. They reached the storeroom door at the back. Poirot bent at once, his keen eyes sweeping the floor. There, caught against the grain of the boards, lay a feather, small, white, and curiously delicate, not at all the kind one might expect from a pigeon or sparrow. Poirot lifted it between finger and thumb with great care. "Curio," he murmured. "Very curio." Hastings peered over his shoulder. What on earth would a feather be doing in Pratt's storeroom? Poirot did not answer immediately. Instead, he took out a small notebook from his pocket and pressed the feather gently between its leaves. He then examined the door itself. The latch bore faint scratches, but not of any recent forcing. He sniffed delicately at the wood, as though scent might tell its own tale. At last, he straightened. No entry tonight. But something, or someone, has been here before. And that feather, ABN, Hastings, it is not from the common hen or goose. Too fine, too white. More likely from an evening cloak, perhaps, trimmed with such adornments. An evening cloak? Hastings repeated incredulously. Poirot, you can't mean to say a lady is behind all this. Poirot spread his hands. One must never leap to conclusions. Yet, we must admit, the clue suggests refinement, not roughness. Does the common burglar attend his midnight escapade clad in garments trimmed with white feathers? None. Pratt had now joined them, his face still damp with nervous sweat. Then what in heaven's name does it mean? Are you saying the thief is no thief at all? Poirot fixed him with a penetrating gaze. I say only this: someone enters your shop who knows it well, who seeks something not for its immediate value but for some hidden purpose. That is why we hear disturbance, but find nothing stolen. Pratt shook his head in despair. I cannot fathom it. My shelves hold no secrets, only goods for sale. Poirot inclined his head slightly. So you believe, monsieur? Yet each object in this world has its story, n'est-ce pas? A chest may hide more than trinkets. A ledger may conceal more than numbers. A shop such as yours, filled with curiosities, may attract those whose interests are not entirely innocent. They return to their chairs by the fire. Hastings, though disappointed not to have confronted a burglar in the flesh, was secretly glad to sit once more in the warmth. Poirot remained silent for some time, eyes half closed, fingertips pressed together. At last he spoke. The feather, the scratching, the thud. They are but whispers, messers, yet together they form the beginning of a language. Hercule Poirot will listen. And when the voice of the mystery grows clear, then we shall answer. The fire burned low, and the shop grew colder. Outside, the clock in the church tower struck 1. No further sounds disturbed them that night. But Poirot, as Hastings noticed, never once allowed his posture to relax, nor his eyes to close. He sat vigilant until dawn broke pale across the square, the feather secreted in his pocket, and the first light of morning showing the little detective deep in thought. And Hastings, though weary and yawning, could not deny it, the adventure had begun. Chapter 3: The Intruder. The following night, the shop seemed even darker and more oppressive. Mr. Pratt, his nerves shaken from the previous vigil, had nonetheless insisted upon repeating the exercise. The villains will come again, he declared, his voice quavering. And this time we shall catch them. Poirot had merely raised an eyebrow and agreed. Hastings, though weary from a poor night's sleep, found himself strangely eager. He had polished the poker from the hearth until it gleamed and was certain he would play a heroic part in the night's adventure. The shop closed at its usual hour. Once again, Pratt drew down the blinds and checked each lock. Poirot inspected his action silently, noting the man's twitching hands and the beads of perspiration that appeared even before the fire was lit. When at last the three men took their positions near the grate, the vigil commenced. Hours crept by. The silence seemed deeper than before, broken only by the occasional settling of the timbers. Hastings fought to keep his eyelids open. Poirot, in contrast, sat immaculately composed, moustaches gleaming in the candlelight, every sense alert. Then, sometime past 1 o'clock, the moment came. A sudden crash of glass shattered the stillness like a pistol shot. Pratt leapt to his feet with a cry, Hastings brandished the poker, and Poirot was already on his toes, eyes gleaming. It is in the main shop. Pratt gasped. They rushed through the half-door. Shadows leapt wildly in the flickering candlelight. A display case near the center stood broken, a jade figurine toppled onto the floor. And, darting between the aisles of curios, a figure moved. Swift, agile, little more than a blur, it dodged behind a tall case of porcelain vases. There! Hastings shouted, and charged. The chase began. Hastings thundered down the narrow aisle, the poker clutched like a saber. The intruder slipped away, knocking over a small table of brass candlesticks with a deafening clatter. Poirot, far more controlled, moved briskly but without haste, observing, noting. Pratt, behind them, wailed in alarm. The figure darted toward the rear of the shop. Hastings lunged, nearly toppling an entire shelf of china. He glimpsed only the trailing hem of a dark coat, the swift turn of a head. Then, with startling suddenness, the intruder was gone. The back door stood firmly locked. No window was open. Yet the shop was empty. Good Lord! Hastings panted, leaning on the poker. He vanished. Pratt wrung his hands. Did you see him? A burglar, plain as day. Oh, my poor shop, my poor treasures. Poirot was silent. He had walked to the broken display case and now bent carefully, examining both the fallen jade figure and the shards of glass. He touched nothing with his hands, but his eyes missed no detail. Nothing has been taken, he said at last, straightening. What? Cried Hastings. But he smashed the case. Yes. He smashed, but he did not steal. Poirot gestured with a small sweep of his hand. The jade figurine lies upon the floor, but it is still here. The other objects, equally valuable, remain untouched. But what sense is there in that? Demanded Hastings. Ah. Poirot's eyes twinkled. The sense is precisely what we must discover. He then moved slowly along the aisle where the figure had run. He bent, lifted a candlestick that had been overturned, examined the floorboards. Finally, he paused by the tall case of porcelain where the intruder had vanished. He tapped gently upon its side, listening to the hollow echo. Mon ami Hastings, do you recall the tricks of the stage magician? The sudden disappearance, the puff of smoke, the concealed panel. You mean, there's a secret door here? Perhaps. Poirot ran his small hand along the edge of the cabinet, then shook his head. No, it is fixed. Yet, the illusion of vanishing is the same. He was here, and then he was not. But remember, we looked with eyes full of excitement. Excitement blinds. Poirot, he does not let himself be blinded. He sniffed the air delicately. Hastings, bemused, did the same. Good heavens, lavender. Poirot nodded. Exactment. The faintest trace. Not the perfume of a man. Not the scent of rough thieves. No, Hastings, this is the fragrance of refinement, of femininity. And it lingers strongest here, near the case. Pratt, who had been wringing his hands all the while, exclaimed in bewilderment, a woman. You think it was a woman? Poirot raised a finger. I think only what my senses tell me. There was a feather last night, and tonight there is lavender. Clues of delicacy, of elegance. It is, how shall we say, not the profile of your average housebreaker. Hastings frowned. Then what on earth was she, if it was a she, doing here at 1 in the morning, breaking glass and running about like a thief? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. That, mon ami, is the heart of the mystery. They examined the rest of the shop, but no door had been forced, no window tampered with. The locks remained unbroken. The only evidence was the shattered display case, the toppled candlesticks, and that faint lingering perfume. At last they returned to the fire, Pratt still shaking. Poirot sat down with the air of a man who has gathered more than enough to set his thoughts in motion. Hastings, frustrated, could not restrain himself. I don't understand it, Poirot. She came in, smashed the case, then ran, and didn't even take the figurine. What possible purpose is there in that? Poirot closed his eyes briefly, fingers pressed together. My dear Hastings, do you remember the story of the hunter who stirs the bushes to see what bird flies out? Sometimes the disturbance is not for gain, but for revelation. We must ask ourselves, what was revealed tonight? Hastings groaned. You speak in riddles. Poirot opened his eyes and smiled faintly. Mais ouï. for the mystery itself is still a riddle. But already we have two pieces of the puzzle, the feather and the perfume. These are not random. They are deliberate. Someone comes here not to steal but to unsettle, to probe, perhaps to search. And, Hastings, let me tell you, there is something in this shop they seek. Pratt gave a moan. But what could it be? I sell only harmless curiosities. Then, monsieur, said Poirot softly, perhaps it is not you who knows best what your shop contains. The fire had burned low. Outside, the bells of St. Mary's struck 2. The vigil ended with more questions than answers, and Poirot's little grey cells, though alight with possibility, kept their secrets. But Hastings, as he trudged back to their lodgings beside him, could not forget the fleeting shadow of the intruder, nor the strange sweetness of lavender lingering in the air. He said at last, Poirot, whoever she was, she gave us the slip tonight. But next time, by Jove, I'll catch her. Poirot chuckled softly. Ah, mon ami, always the chase, always the drama. But it is not with the muscles we shall catch her. It is with the mind. And in that pursuit, Hastings, she is already closer to our grasp than she believes. And so the night closed, with broken glass on the shop floor and a mystery deepening like the shadows of Winstable itself. Chapter 4, with the suspicions. The morning after the second vigil dawned grey and damp, with a fine drizzle hanging over the town. Winstable looked drearier than ever, its cobbles slick and its shop fronts dull beneath the weather. Yet Poirot, stepping neatly from their lodgings with his cane in hand, appeared as immaculate as always, shoes gleaming, moustaches waxed to perfection, his demeanour one of alert serenity. Hastings, on the other hand, was bleary-eyed and irritable. Another sleepless night, Poirot. If this goes on much longer, I'll be good for nothing. And all we've gained is a smashed display case and the faint smell of lavender. Poirot gave a little shrug. Patience, mon ami. It is with such trifles that the grandest puzzles are solved. Lavender, a feather, bah! To you, they are nothing. To me, they are signposts. We must follow where they lead. Their first call was back to Pratt's shop. The proprietor greeted them with a face still drawn and puffy from the ordeal of the night before. He wrung Poirot's hand effusively, declaring that without his presence he would have collapsed from terror altogether. You saw her, Mr. Poirot? You agree it was a woman? Pratt asked eagerly, his eyes darting. I saw a figure, monsieur. The evidence of scent and feather suggests femininity, but Hercule Poirot does not leap. He walks, step by step, until the truth is clear. Poirot's tone was gentle but firm. Pratt shook his head. I cannot make sense of it. What would a lady want in my shop at such an hour? Indeed, murmured Poirot. What, indeed? While Hastings engaged Pratt in chatter about the damages, Poirot wandered through the shop once more. He studied the cabinets with their ordered displays, pausing longest at the ledgers behind the counter. When Pratt noticed his interest, he grew flustered. Just the business accounts, sir. Nothing remarkable. A list of purchases, sales, consignments. Poirot inclined his head politely but did not pursue the matter further, for the moment. After leaving Pratt, Poirot announced his next destination. We must speak with Mademoiselle Holt. Miss Clara Holt was Pratt's assistant, a young woman of perhaps 25, with keen blue eyes and a manner that suggested both intelligence and impatience. They found her arranging a window display of porcelain figurines. Good morning, mademoiselle, Poirot greeted her with a courtly bow. You have, I trust, heard of last night's disturbance. She set down a vase carefully before replying. Mr. Pratt told me. I can't say I'm surprised. This place has felt uneasy for weeks. Things not where I left them, odd noises. It's a wonder it hasn't happened sooner. Her voice was brisk, yet Poirot detected the faintest tremor beneath it. He stepped closer, studying her with his sharp, bird-like gaze. "And you yourself, mademoiselle, did you ever see or hear anything when you closed the shop alone?" She hesitated. "Once or twice I thought I heard footsteps after I locked up. But when I checked, there was nothing. I told myself it was imagination." Poirot nodded slowly. "Imagination, it is a word that covers much. Tell me, mademoiselle, do you wear perfume?" She looked at him sharply. "What a question!" "Sometimes." "Why?" "A delicate fragrance, perhaps lavender." A flush rose to her cheeks. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, dabbing at her face. Hastings, watching, caught the unmistakable scent. Poirot's moustaches twitched almost imperceptibly. "Lavender, yes," she admitted at last. "I've worn it for years." "But surely that's of no importance." "On the contrary," said Poirot softly. "Every detail is of importance." Miss Holt's lips tightened. "If you're suggesting I had anything to do with these disturbances, Mr. Poirot, you are quite mistaken. I have worked here faithfully, and I've no cause to creep about in the dark smashing cabinets." Poirot raised a calming hand. "I accuse no one, mademoiselle. I merely collect the facts. One day, they will arrange themselves into order, and then the truth will speak. Until then, we wait." She turned back to her display, but her color had not quite returned. Outside the shop, Hastings whispered urgently, "Poirot. You don't mean to say Miss Holt's mixed up in this?" Poirot glanced sideways at him, amused. "My dear Hastings, you are always so quick to leap upon the first suspect. Because she wears lavender, you think she must be guilty. Non. The scent is a clue, but whether it points to her, or merely passes near her, we do not yet know." "But it is suspicious," Hastings insisted. Poirot patted his arm kindly. "Suspicious, yes. Conclusive, no. There is a world of difference." Their next visit took them across the square to Vale's Antiques, a shop directly opposite Pratt's. Where Pratt's establishment was cluttered, Vale's was arranged with austere elegance, neat rows of polished wood, gleaming glass, and carefully labelled pieces. Mr. Edmund Vale himself stood behind the counter, a tall, thin man with iron-grey hair and a cold, disdainful manner. When Poirot explained their business, Vale's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. "So Pratt claims burglars again, does he? That man would say anything to draw sympathy. He is on the brink of ruin, you know. Overextended, always boasting of rare imports he cannot truly afford. A staged burglary would be just his sort of trick, an insurance swindle dressed up as melodrama." Hastings bristled. "I don't see that at all. We saw the intruder with our own eyes." Vale gave a short laugh. "Then it must have been one of his accomplices. Did he not invite you to act as witnesses, so you could testify to his story? Convenient, I should say." Poirot, however, did not rise to the bait. He studied Vale's lined face, his thin fingers tapping upon the counter. "You speak with great certainty, monsieur. Yet what would Pratt gain from breaking his own cabinet and frightening himself nearly into apoplexy?" Vale's eyes glittered. "What men will do for money, Monsieur Poirot, would fill volumes. Believe me, Pratt is not above deception." They left the rival shop with the man's words ringing in their ears. Hastings was quick to side with him. "It makes sense, Poirot. Pratt sets up this show, smashes a case or two, spreads tales of burglars, and then claims on his insurance. We've been made fools of." Poirot shook his head gently. "Perhaps, Hastings. But one must examine the stage carefully before judging the play. If Pratt wished to stage a burglary, why these curious details, the feather, the perfume, the vanishing figure? Too elaborate for mere fraud, I think. Too refined. Hastings sighed. Then where does that leave us? Poirot smiled, tapping his temple. With questions, mon ami. Always the questions. Why does Miss Holt flush at the mention of lavender? Why does Vale speak with such venom against Pratt? And why, above all, does the intruder disturb but not steal? Each answer, when found, will move us closer to the heart of the mystery. As they walked back through the rain-slicked streets, Hastings could not help but feel the ground shifting beneath him. Suspicions abounded, yet certainty seemed further away than ever. Poirot, however, appeared supremely content. For where Hastings saw only confusion, Poirot saw the threads of a pattern slowly, inevitably, weaving themselves together. Chapter 5, The Second Night. The drizzle had cleared by evening, but the streets of Winstable remained slick and gleaming, like dark ribbons under the lamplight. The town was hushed, only the muffled clop of hooves and the occasional bark of a dog disturbed the stillness. Inside Pratt's Curiosities and Fine Goods, preparations for the second vigil were underway. Mr. Pratt, though more nervous than ever, insisted upon trying again. We must, he declared, his hands fluttering as he rearranged objects already neatly aligned. The villains will not stop until they have what they want. Last night was only a rehearsal, I am sure of it. Poirot merely nodded, while Hastings eyed the broken display case, now hastily patched with brown paper and string. The jade figurine, undamaged, sat once more in its place. Seems a queer sort of burglar, Hastings muttered, one who breaks glass and runs off without pinching anything. Poirot gave a small smile. Ah, but sometimes the breaking of glass is itself the theft, mon ami. What is stolen may not be the object, but the attention, the distraction. Hastings shook his head, bewildered as ever by Poirot's cryptic observations. As the last customer departed and the door was locked, the three men settled again by the fire at the rear. The atmosphere was even heavier than the night before. Shadows gathered thickly in the corners, and the faint draught that whistled under the door seemed full of menace. Pratt was jumpier than ever, starting at each creak of the boards. Hastings gripped the poker like a sword. Poirot sat perfectly still, his small figure radiating calm authority, his eyes reflecting the firelight like twin lamps. Midnight came, then half past. The minutes dragged. Hastings's eyelids grew heavy, his chin dipped, and twice Poirot had to prod him gently with the silver knob of his cane. Then it came, a sound unlike the scratching of the previous night. This was softer, stranger, the sound of laughter. A faint ripple of amusement, high-pitched, unmistakably human, drifting from somewhere below. Hastings stiffened, wide awake in an instant. Good Lord, Poirot! Did you hear that? Poirot raised a finger to his lips. Pratt clutched the arms of his chair, his face ashen. Again the sound came, a tinkling laugh, then silence. This time it is not the storeroom, Poirot murmured. This time it is the cellar. Hastings sprang up, eager for action. Poirot followed at his measured pace, Pratt stumbling behind. They moved down a narrow corridor at the back of the shop, their candle throwing grotesque shadows upon the walls. At the far end was a door of thick oak, barred with iron. Pratt fumbled with the key, his hand shaking so that the metal rattled against the lock. At last the door swung open. A flight of stone steps descended into the darkness. The air that rose to meet them was damp and musty, carrying the smell of earth and mildew. Hastings held the candle aloft. Hello? Who's there? No answer. Only silence, broken by the faint drip of water. They descended cautiously, Poirot watching each step with care, as though even cobwebs might yield a clue. The cellar was vast and cluttered with old crates, broken furniture, and forgotten wares covered in dust. The candlelight cast a small island of brightness, beyond which the shadows pressed like a living thing. They searched carefully, but there was no sign of an intruder. The laughter had ceased as suddenly as it had begun. Pratt was trembling so violently that Hastings feared he might collapse. It was a trick of the wind, Pratt whispered hoarsely. It must have been. Poirot stooped beside a stack of crates. Something caught his eye, a leather-bound ledger, its cover mottled with dust, lying half-buried beneath a heap of packing straw. He lifted it delicately and brushed it clean. "A ledger, Monsieur Pratt?" Poirot asked softly. Pratt frowned. "Why, yes. Old records, nothing more. We keep many such books." Poirot opened it. The pages were yellowed, filled with neat columns of writing, consignments, purchases, dates. But where the list should have continued, there were abrupt gaps. Several pages had been torn out, carefully and deliberately. Poirot ran his fingers over the ragged edges. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious indeed." Hastings peered over his shoulder. "Missing pages, Poirot. But what would a burglar want with that?" Poirot snapped the book shut. "Precisely the question, mon ami. You see, perhaps it is not the jade figurine, nor the porcelain vases, nor the silver candlesticks that draw our mysterious visitor. Perhaps it is knowledge." "Knowledge?" Hastings repeated. "OUI. Information. Records. Something written here, on these very pages, has been sought, and perhaps already taken. That would explain why nothing else is touched. The intruder is not a thief of trinkets. She is a seeker of truth." Pratt shook his head wildly. "Impossible. There is nothing of value in those old records." Poirot's eyes glinted. "No value to you, Monsieur Pratt. But to another? Who can say?" They searched the rest of the cellar, but nothing more was discovered. At length they returned upstairs. Hastings, frustrated, set the ledger upon the counter with a thump. "It's dashed odd, Poirot. A lady sneaking into the shop, breaking glass, laughing in the cellar, stealing old bits of paper. It doesn't add up to anything sensible." Poirot smiled faintly. "On the contrary, Hastings, it adds up to a great deal. We must only learn the sum. Already we have 3 signs, the feather, the perfume, the laughter. Together they tell a story. What remains is to interpret it." Pratt groaned. "And how much longer must this go on? My nerves cannot bear another night." Poirot patted his arm. "Courage, monsieur. You are nearer to safety than you think. For each disturbance brings more light. Soon, very soon, the veil will be lifted." That night, as they walked back to their lodgings through the damp streets, Hastings was restless. "Poirot, what do you make of it? Are you suggesting Pratt himself knows more than he admits?" Poirot looked thoughtful. "Monsieur Pratt is a man of nerves, yes, but also of secrets. Secrets leave their traces, just as perfume lingers in the air. We must follow both." Hastings pressed him, but Poirot only smiled, tapping his temple. "Patience, Hastings. The little grey cells must work. And they are working now, very busily indeed." The drizzle began again, misting the cobbles and blurring the lamps. Hastings pulled his coat tight, but Poirot walked on serenely, as though the rain existed only to sharpen his thoughts. In Hastings's mind the echoes of that laughter still lingered. He shivered, and not from the cold. Whoever prowled in Pratt's shop was no ordinary thief. That much was clear. And he could not shake the unease that, for all Poirot's calm assurance, the danger was drawing ever closer. Chapter 6. The Trap is Set. The morning after the unnerving laughter in Pratt's cellar, Hastings expected Poirot to plunge at once into furious investigation. Instead, his friend took breakfast with an almost maddening leisure. He buttered his toast with delicate precision, added precisely 3 lumps of sugar to his chocolate, and adjusted his napkin before so much as uttering a word of business. Hastings barely touched his bacon, burst out, "Poirot, are you going to sit there calmly while some lunatic terrorizes Pratt's shop? We've had feathers, perfume, broken glass, laughter, and now missing ledger pages. If this isn't the time to act, I don't know what is." Poirot smiled, twirling his moustaches. "Calm, mon ami. It is only in calm that the little grey cells work at their best. Action without reflection is as a cannon without aim." Hastings groaned. "But what are you aiming at?" Poirot dabbed his lips delicately with his napkin. "At the truth, Hastings. And to capture it, we must construct a snare. Tonight, I shall bait it with a diamond." "A diamond?" Hastings nearly dropped his fork. "You don't mean to risk one of Pratt's?" Poirot shook his head. "Pratt's Curiosities, they are already suspect. Instead, I have procured a stone from an acquaintance, one which sparkles sufficiently to inflame desire, yet whose value is only moderate. To our intruder, it will seem a prize beyond compare." "And you mean to display it openly in the shop?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Just so. The moth cannot resist the flame. But unlike the moth, our visitor will not escape the fire." That afternoon, they returned to Pratt's Curiosities and fine goods under the pretense of casual conversation. Pratt, though visibly strained, was relieved by Poirot's calm manner. "Another vigil tonight?" he asked tremulously. "Indeed," said Poirot. "But with a difference. We shall tempt our visitor to reveal herself." He produced from his pocket a small velvet box. Inside, cushioned in white satin, lay a glittering stone that caught the light with cold brilliance. Pratt gasped. "Good heavens! That must be worth a fortune." Poirot closed the box. "A fortune in appearance, perhaps. In reality, it is of modest worth. But that is between ourselves. To any other eye, it is a treasure fit to risk much for. We shall display it prominently, in the very cabinet where the jade figurine resides." Pratt paled. "But, Mr. Poirot, what if it is stolen?" Poirot's voice was firm. "It will not be stolen, monsieur. You may trust Hercule Poirot for that." So it was arranged. In the late afternoon, Poirot supervised as the diamond was placed carefully within the glass case at the center of the shop. The light from the front window struck it directly, so that it gleamed with irresistible brilliance. Miss Holt arrived soon after, her eyes widening as she saw the new addition. "A diamond," she breathed. "Why, Mr. Pratt, where did you come by such a thing?" "An item on loan," Pratt said stiffly. "Mr. Poirot has arranged it." Hastings thought he saw something flicker in her expression, an odd mix of fascination and fear, but it was gone in an instant as she busied herself with arranging porcelain figures. Later, Poirot drew Hastings aside. "Observe, Hastings. The eyes, they tell what the lips conceal." Mademoiselle Holt was startled, even unsettled. It is not the diamond itself that alarms her, but what its presence implies. "I don't follow." Poirot gave his small, infuriating smile. "You will, mon ami. Patience." That night, the vigil took on an air of theatre. Poirot arranged the seating differently, placing himself at a small table near the center, Hastings to one side, Pratt behind the counter. The shop was left otherwise unchanged, the diamond glimmering like a lure in the darkened room. Midnight came and went. The 3 men waited in taut silence, the ticking of the clock loud as hammer blows. Hastings strained his ears for any sound, every creak setting his nerves on edge. Then, it happened. A faint rustling, not from the cellar nor the storeroom this time, but from above. The ceiling creaked. Dust fell softly from a beam. Someone was in the rooms overhead. Pratt's face turned chalk white. The flat! But it's empty, has been for years. Poirot raised a finger for silence. The rustling grew louder, then ceased. Suddenly, with startling force, the front door rattled violently against its lock, though no key turned in it. Pratt gave a muffled cry. Hastings leapt up, but Poirot remained motionless, eyes glittering. Moments later, a shadow appeared against the far wall, cast by the faint moonlight filtering through the shop window. The outline was unmistakably feminine, slender, graceful, head held high. The figure moved towards the case containing the diamond. Hastings's heart hammered. He half rose, but Poirot's hand restrained him. Not yet, Poirot whispered. The figure extended an arm, then vanished. Just like that, gone, as though it had dissolved into the air. Pratt collapsed into a chair, gasping. Ghosts! It must be ghosts! Poirot rose at last, smoothing his jacket. Non, Monsieur Pratt. Not ghosts. Human flesh and blood. And tonight, we have learned something vital. What, Poirot? Hastings demanded. That our intruder knows the shop better than any stranger could. She glides as one familiar with its every corner. And, most curious of all, she dares not take the diamond. Why, Hastings? Ask yourself that. Why present the hand to seize, and yet withdraw it at the last? Hastings frowned. Fear of being caught. Poirot wagged a finger. Perhaps. But I think it is not fear of us. It is fear of the diamond itself. That, mon ami, is most significant. Pratt moaned softly. But who can she be? And why torment me so? Poirot's gaze was unreadable. That, monsieur, we shall know soon. The snare is tightening. Already the threads draw close around the guilty one. Back in their lodgings later, Hastings was still perplexed. But Poirot, it doesn't make sense. If the lady wanted the diamond, why didn't she take it? And if she didn't want it, why approach the case at all? Poirot sat serenely in his chair, fingertips pressed together. It makes perfect sense, Hastings, once you ask the right question. Do not ask what she sought to steal. Ask instead, what was she afraid to touch? Afraid. O-U-I. Afraid. There lies the solution. Soon we shall pluck it out, like a pearl from the oyster. Hastings shook his head, utterly baffled. But he had learned enough to know that when Poirot's eyes glittered in that particular way, revelation was not far off. Chapter 7. The Net Tightens. The following morning broke bright and clear, as though the heavens themselves had washed away the previous night's unease. Yet in Winstable, the tension remained. The story of disturbances at Pratt's shop had already seeped into the marketplace, whispered from stall to stall. Housewives clutched their baskets more tightly, and even the postman looked over his shoulder as he passed by. Hastings, striding at Poirot's side, could feel the weight of suspense pressing down on the little town. I don't like it, Poirot. Whoever she is, she seems to vanish into thin air. Pratt is nearly at his wit's end, and Miss Holt looks as though she's hiding something. And Vale across the way, he all but accused Pratt outright. Poirot nodded gently. Yes, Hastings. The pieces of the puzzle lie upon the table. Now it is time to see which belong to the picture, and which are only scattered fragments meant to confuse us. Their first visit was to Clara Holt. They found her dusting the porcelain figurines, though her hands moved with nervous haste, knocking one or two pieces dangerously close to the edge. She started when she saw Poirot, her eyes flicking almost involuntarily towards the cabinet that now displayed the glittering diamond. Good morning, mademoiselle, said Poirot smoothly. You are troubled, I think. The disturbances of the night weigh heavily upon you. She pressed her lips together. I don't know what you mean. I've been sleeping soundly. Poirot advanced a step, lowering his voice. Yet you wear the lavender still. Her cheeks coloured. What of it? I like the scent. Just so. But the intruder also leaves that fragrance in her wake. Coincidence, perhaps. Or perhaps Poirot let the suggestion dangle like bait on a line. Miss Holt set down the figurine with a small clatter. You're trying to frighten me, Mr. Poirot. I won't stand for it. I've done nothing wrong. Poirot bowed slightly. I frighten no one, mademoiselle. I merely observe. And what I observe tells me that you know more than you admit. One day soon, you must speak. Until then, we wait. As they left the shop, Hastings whispered urgently, Poirot. You practically accused her. Poirot smiled faintly. Non, Hastings. I merely opened the door and invited her to walk through. Whether she chooses to do so will reveal much. Their next stop was Vale's Antiques across the square. Edmund Vale greeted them with his usual cold disdain. So, he sneered, the farce continues. Pratt's ghostly lady still walks, I suppose? Or did she vanish with your diamond? The diamond, Poirot said mildly, remains exactly where I placed it. Yet she did approach, oh, yes. She extended her hand, then withdrew it. Fascinating, n'est-ce pas? Vale's thin lips curved in a humorless smile. Or else Pratt played you for fools and staged it all. I tell you, Poirot, the man is a bankrupt waiting to happen. His accounts are in ruins. You do better to investigate his ledgers than chase after shadows. Perhaps I have done both, said Poirot softly. Tell me, Monsieur Vale, have you ever had occasion to examine Pratt's business dealings yourself? Vale's eyes narrowed. I keep a close watch on all my competitors. He has brought in shipments under names that do not appear in his official records. Smuggling, I should not wonder. Poirot inclined his head gravely. Merci, monsieur. Your candour is most enlightening. Outside again, Hastings shook his head. It seems to me, Poirot, Vale has a ready-made motive. If Pratt were ruined, Vale would profit. But do you believe him? Poirot's moustaches quivered. Believe? Hastings, one must never believe too quickly. Vale's venom may be truth, or it may be spite dressed as truth. Yet his words about the ledgers, they are interesting. Remember, the missing pages. Later that afternoon, Poirot asked Pratt to meet them privately in the back parlour. The shopkeeper arrived pale and sweating, his hands twisting in agitation. Mr. Poirot, he said hoarsely, I can't endure it. Each night brings worse terrors. And now the town whispers. My business will not survive if this continues. You must end it. Poirot regarded him keenly. Monsieur Pratt, there are matters you have concealed. Your ledgers, for example. Pages torn out. Why? Pratt stammered, colour rising to his cheeks. Old records, worthless. They concern shipments years ago. Nothing that matters now. But someone believes they matter very much, Poirot said sharply. Else why risk exposure to take them? Who would that be, Monsieur Pratt? Pratt sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I don't know. I swear I don't know. Poirot placed a hand gently on his shoulder. Perhaps you tell yourself that. But your conscience knows otherwise. And soon, monsieur, you will be compelled to face it. That evening, Poirot and Hastings walked along the damp quay. Fishing boats rocked gently at their moorings, their lanterns glowing in the twilight. Hastings was restless, unable to keep his thoughts contained. Poirot, I can't make sense of it. Miss Holt with her lavender, Vale with his malice, Pratt with his secrets, any one of them could be mixed up in it. And yet nothing fits together cleanly. Poirot stopped, gazing out across the dark water. That, Hastings, is the essence of the puzzle. Each has motive, each has opportunity, each tells a story. But only one story aligns with the facts. Consider, why break glass yet steal nothing? Why laugh in the cellar? Why approach the diamond and recoil? Why tear pages from a ledger? Hastings shook his head. You make it sound as though they're all connected. Poirot's eyes glittered. They are. And tomorrow night, I shall prove it. The net is ready. With but one more vigil, the truth will walk into our arms. The following day passed in a haze of anticipation. Poirot went about with his usual calm precision, but Hastings could see the intensity behind his composure. He sent discreet messages, arranged quiet meetings, and even spent half an hour pacing the shop floor in measured steps, as though rehearsing a performance only he understood. By evening, everything was prepared. Pratt, though on the verge of collapse, consented to another vigil. Miss Holt lingered uneasily, her eyes darting often towards the glittering diamond. Vale was seen loitering across the street, peering through his shop window with ill-concealed curiosity. Poirot gathered Hastings close as the shop was closed for the night. This, mon ami, is the final act. The stage is set, the players assembled. Tonight, the Phantom Lady of Winstable shall be unmasked. Watch carefully, for every gesture, every glance will matter. Hastings gripped his friend's arm. You already know, don't you? You've known for some time. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. I know enough. But tonight, the world shall know also. And Hercule Poirot will show once more that it is the little grey cells, not ghosts, not shadows, that reveal the truth. And with that, the final vigil began. Chapter 8, The Final Revelation. The third night fell like a velvet curtain over Winstable, the streetlights casting long, quivering shadows upon the cobbles. Inside Pratt's Curiosities and Fine Goods, Poirot moved with his usual precision, inspecting every corner, touching nothing, observing everything. The diamond gleamed from its case as if daring the intruder to try her hand once more. Hastings, nerves taut, clutched the poker as he took his place near the counter. Pratt sat behind it, pale and trembling, yet clinging to the hope that tonight the mystery would end. Poirot, seated at the small table near the center, fingers steepled beneath his chin, gave off the serene air of a man already in possession of the solution. Hours passed with no disturbance, yet Poirot's eyes never wavered. Then, just past midnight, a faint rustle came, not from the storeroom, not the cellar, but from the corner where a narrow passage led behind the shelves of Curiosities. The sound was light, deliberate, yet unmistakably human. Hastings whispered, "Here she comes, Poirot." "Patience, mon ami," Poirot replied softly. "Let her reveal herself fully. The net is prepared." A shadow emerged. Delicate, graceful, moving with a knowledge of the shop's every obstacle, there she was, the intruder. Hastings almost lunged, but Poirot's restraining hand held him firmly. Poirot rose and addressed the figure calmly. "Ah, mademoiselle, we meet at last. Pray, come forward and explain yourself." The intruder froze, then slowly turned. Beneath the mask of shadow, Hastings could now see the face of a young woman, refined, intelligent, eyes wide with startled fear, lips pressed tightly. The scent of lavender lingered faintly in the air. Poirot gestured to the diamond. "You approached it, yet withdrew. You have torn pages from Pratt's ledger, and last night you laughed in the cellar. You are aware that all of these actions have been observed. And now, mademoiselle, it is time to speak the truth." The woman's voice trembled as she spoke. I only wanted information. Nothing more. I did not touch the diamond, I swear. Poirot's sharp eyes studied her closely. Information? From Pratt's ledgers? OUI. Tell me, why? What is it you seek? Her gaze flicked nervously to Pratt. I work for my uncle, monsieur. He lost a shipment of priceless gemstones years ago. They were recorded in Pratt's books, but disappeared without trace. I thought, perhaps Pratt knew something. I only wanted to find out. Hastings blinked. So she wasn't here to steal. Poirot gave a small, satisfied smile. Exactment. She is no thief in the common sense. She is a seeker, a detective of her own right, driven by duty and family loyalty. The disturbances, the broken glass, the laughter, the approach to the diamond, were all tests, all attempts to discover the truth without alerting Pratt prematurely. Pratt's jaw dropped. Tests? For what? You've terrified me nearly to death for information. Poirot nodded. The intruder acted out of caution. She needed to see, to touch as little as possible, to observe without committing a crime. And she believed that Hercule Poirot might not notice. Ah, but I notice everything, monsieur, every tremor of the hand, every hesitation, every scent. The woman's shoulders sagged. I never meant to frighten anyone. I only wanted to know if the gemstones were still in Pratt's possession, or if the records might lead me to them. Gemstones! Pratt exclaimed. There are no gemstones. I swear, none. Only ledgers of transactions long past. Poirot tapped his temple. Ah, Monsieur Pratt, the records are more than mere numbers. They are the tracks of human intent, the footprints of opportunity. And they misled our young lady, yes, but not maliciously. She acted with honesty, though her methods, well, they are dramatic. Hastings shook his head. I can't believe all this fuss over old ledgers. And that diamond you used as bait, it played no part at all. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Ah, Hastings, the diamond was the final key. It revealed her caution, her respect for law and order. She approached, but she did not touch. That hesitation told me more than any words ever could. Observe, my friend, she does not steal, she seeks truth. Pratt finally found his voice. So all the broken glass, the noises, the laughter, it was her. OUI, said Poirot. The broken glass was necessary to test the movement of the shop at night. The laughter in the cellar was a nervous outlet, perhaps, or an attempt to ensure she was unseen. Each action, though alarming, was a clue to her character, not evidence of malice. The young woman looked down at her hands, ashamed. I only wanted to help my uncle recover what was lost. I thought no one would understand. Poirot approached gently. And now you understand, mademoiselle. You have acted with courage and intelligence. Perhaps, in another life, you would have been a great detective yourself. Hastings, still trying to grasp the enormity of the revelation, muttered, I can't believe it. The lady who terrified Pratt, who sent us on 2 nights of sleepless vigil, was searching for lost gemstones. Nothing more. Poirot raised a finger. And therein lies the subtlety, Hastings. The mind of the criminal, and even the mind of the innocent, is often hidden beneath layers of action and misdirection. One must observe not only what is taken, but what is left untouched. That is the lesson of the vigil. Pratt, recovering some composure, adjusted his tie and cleared his throat. I suppose I owe you an apology, mademoiselle. Though I cannot say I am grateful for the fear, I do see now that your intentions were honest. The young woman nodded. I meant no harm. Truly. Poirot turned to Hastings with a twinkle. You see, mon ami, the net has been drawn tight. The mystery resolved, not by force, not by panic, but by patience, observation, and the use of the little grey cells. Hastings exhaled, relief flooding through him. "Poirot, you make it sound so simple. But I can't believe we almost accused her wrongly, or that Vale, and Pratt, and even we, were all misled by appearances." "That, Hastings, is the essence of detection," Poirot said gently. "Appearances are often the greatest deception. The truth lies in detail, in hesitation, in what one fears to touch. Remember the feather, the lavender, the ledger pages, and the hesitation before the diamond. Each spoke volumes. And now the story is complete." As the young woman gathered her courage to leave, Pratt escorted her to the door. "And the gemstones?" he asked cautiously. "They remain lost for now," she said, "but at least I have a lead." The record she sought have been noted. Poirot's gaze followed her. "And for all of Winstable, another night of suspense and fear has ended, and justice, of a kind, has been served." The intruder's heart was pure, even if her methods were theatrical. "Mais oui, all is well." Hastings shook his head in amazement. "Poirot, I suppose there's no one alive who could have solved this as elegantly as you. Feathers, perfume, laughter, a veritable symphony of subtlety. And we were caught in the melody." Poirot chuckled softly, smoothing his moustaches. "Ah, Hastings, it is precisely in the subtle notes that the truth is found. One must listen, observe, and never ignore a detail, however trifling. That is the lesson, and the delight, of detection." Outside, the streets of Winstable were quiet once more. Inside the shop, the broken glass had been cleared, the diamond safely secured, and Pratt's nerves, though still fragile, were easing. Poirot, seated once again at his table, allowed himself a faint smile. Another mystery concluded, another web untangled, with patience, intellect, and grace. And as Hastings gazed at him with admiration, he knew that, as always, Hercule Poirot had once again proven the brilliance of the little grey cells.